Listen to this episode if you are wondering what you must know about the foundations of your brand in order to thrive on social media. This is a conversation that I think is really important because I know so many people started their business, their product-based business, as it was a hobby, or they just started creating something, so they made an Instagram around it, and then all of a sudden it kind of accidentally turned into a business. Many people start a brand with the intention of having a brand and having a business, but also many people kind of accidentally fall into business. And either bucket that you land in, this is going to be really helpful for you because there are some basic things about business and about your brand that you really need to know in order to really have a brand that you are able to create potent marketing, create a community, and really have really solid sales. Hello, welcome to the Small Business Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Madison Page, and if you're watching on YouTube, we have a little special friend. My little pup is sitting on my lap here as well. This is Arlo. I'm a business growth specialist and I teach people how to build a community around their brand on social media. I help product-based business owners stand out and sell out by having this community that just adores them online. This podcast in 2024 was among the top 2% of podcasts globally. This community is incredible and I'm so happy that you are here. Make sure you follow us, subscribe. We put out new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. I like to teach in a fun conversational type of way, kind of like sipping coffee with a biz bestie is what I like to say. I want it to feel like you are literally sitting across from me, sipping a cup of coffee, and we're having a nice little conversation. If you do, I know so many people really love a video podcast. This episode is on YouTube as well. I am in the works of trying to figure out how to get the video onto Spotify so you guys can watch it right on there soon as well. So kind of talking about the foundations of your brand, if you don't have formal business knowledge, you might not even know that there are actual foundations of your brand. And so I literally took a full class just on making a business plan. So what we're talking about today is things that brands do when someone comes and says, I have this product, this is what a brand really should have before they even market. Now it's okay if you're already marketing and you don't have these things, we can always add them on. But if you are struggling on social media, you feel like you kind of just blend into everybody else, you never know what to say in your content, you feel like you are just saying the exact same thing over and over and over again, a lot of times it actually comes from the lack of foundations. Now, when I look at kind of my 4-step framework to getting to consistent sales, this is step 1. I go through this with every single one of my clients because if we don't have certain elements at the core of our brand really solidified, it's actually really hard to market because you don't know who you're talking to, you don't know what you should be talking about, and your topics that you're actually covering feel very general, they feel very ambiguous, and they actually feel that way for your audience as well, which is a lot of times why we have unengaging content, why your community really isn't tapped in, you feel like you're just missing something. A lot of times it's not a content problem, it's actually foundations of your business problem. And it's a perfect example of you don't know what you don't know, and if these are things that you have never learned, today is a day that is changing. So if you started a profile while this was a hobby, or maybe you haven't really identified what your brand identity is, you don't even really know what that means, maybe you just started creating content without really having a solid business plan or a really solid brand identity, these are all pieces that we really need to make sure that you have strategized and you have in place in order for people to actually be able to really connect properly in your marketing. These are foundations of your brand that are actually very necessary in order for you to thrive, not only on social media and selling online, but also if you're ever pitching wholesale, if you're ever trying to get an investor, anything like that. These are very basic business principles that every brand really should know, and it's just going to help everything else from there. When a brand is started, before even really thinking about marketing, before even thinking about posting anything, creating the profile, these are things that you really are supposed to map out. But if you don't have them yet, it's not too late. So at the core of my 4-pillar framework to get you to consistent sales on social media, they are pillars, presence, people, and profit. I have full podcast episodes out there kind of talking about my framework to help you get to consistent sales and what that really looks like. We bring every single client through these 4 steps. Today, we're talking about pillars, and notice that it is before presence, which is your your online presence. So at this point, like you don't have a social media, you're not marketing, you're not doing anything. So what do we really need to know about the brand actually of it, like at the core? At this point, you might have a product, you might have an idea for your brand, but you're kind of basically, you have a product in front of you and you're basically saying, who is going to buy this? What's going to make this different? And where, like, how am I actually framing this product within the marketplace? So some of the most common things that we really need to know, and this is just a few, are your ideal customer, aka who are you selling to? Like really, who is the person that you are trying to attract? The second one is brand values. Who is your business at the core of their brand? Or do you stand on sustainability or health or, global issues? Or are you like affordable? Like what is kind of the value of your brand? That are you inclusive? Like what are the elements that you kind of want to differentiate by and like put your stance in the industry on? The next one is differentiator. What is actually different about your brand than the other brands within the industry? And your brand identity. Your brand identity can be kind of visuals, colors, the aesthetic that you really are looking for. And so when we're looking at your brand, whether you have candles or jewelry or you're a boutique or whatever it is that you are selling, we need to be able to identify at least these 4 things. There are some other things that we want to kind of look at here, but first things first is really looking at that ideal customer. How can you know how to market without knowing who you're actually speaking to? A good example that I like to say here is if you are giving a speech and someone says, hey, you have to give a speech tomorrow, your first question is going to be either about what or who am I speaking to? Like, who is this speech to? And so the difference between marketing that has these foundations versus marketing that doesn't have these foundations is somebody saying, hey, tomorrow you have to give a speech. And somebody saying, hey, tomorrow you have to give a speech about confidence to kindergartners in a very nurturing tone. That is kind of the difference here, as opposed to having very generalized marketing that feels like it's just speaking to everybody. It's going to be lackluster. It's going to lack engagement. It's going to feel like, you're posting and you're putting things out there, but it's not really going. It's also going to be hard to market because like, what are you even supposed to say? Like, what is the speech supposed to be about? How am I supposed to say it? Like, what am I supposed to frame it? What stories can I utilize? What voice can I say it in? Instead of that, you have a lot of really great direction. So when people come to me and they ask me some certain questions, a lot of times it's like, Maddie, what do I post? How do I come up with new content ideas all the time? Like, I feel super repetitive. Is that normal? My question a lot of times is okay, like what content strategy are you following? Most people say at that point, I don't really have a content strategy, because if you have a content strategy and if you have foundations of your brand, content actually gets to be really, really, really easy. And that is kind of that speech. Like, again, like if I were to tell you, it'd be pretty easy to write a speech about confidence for kindergartners in a very nurturing tone, because I've told you how specific we want it and how directed we want it. And you can already kind of envision how that would come across. Now, maybe you're sweating already just with the idea of maybe possibly having to give a speech, but it is something that you can kind of start to identify what that would really look like. So if your content feels sticky and you don't have these things, it might be one of the major contributing factors to this. Of course, if you don't have a content strategy, but you have some of these things in place, it all kind of stacks on top of each other. So how I like to teach business is really go from the ground level, because we want our foundations to be really solid. You hear the like phrase all the time, you don't want to build a house on a broken or a cracked foundation. Same thing with business. Our foundation has to be concrete and solid. We need to know who you're talking to. Your brand values is, what does your business really stand for? What kind of stance are you taking within your industry? The differentiator is what tangibly is actually differentiating your product from everybody else's. And if you don't have a tangible benefit, we have to create one. So maybe it's a little bit more intangible. And then we look at your brand identity. We want to actually create the actual aesthetic around it. So how this would look, like, let's say, and I help people start their business, like launch their business all the time. And let's say somebody came to me and they wanted to start a skincare brand, because it's really common. I work with a lot of like very natural skincare lines, and they come to me and they say, Maddie, I have this one product that I absolutely love. And I really want to launch this product. I want it to be all about simplicity in skincare. And I want to launch maybe this product line. Let's say, it's 4 different pieces and I have these 4 pieces here. And I say, that's great. What makes your product so different? Is usually my first, like, okay, what makes this product so different? Or like, who would it be perfect for? Because the first thing that we really need to understand is it's called product market fit, which means, is there actually a product market out there that would buy this product? So, who is the person that would buy it, and do they actually need it? First question, because you can create a product that nobody wants nor needs, and it's not actually going to work. So we need to make sure that people want it and people or need it, and how can we actually create that to happen? And then we need to see, who is that person? Are they like the pink Pilates, very clean girl aesthetic? Or is it a busy mom that's like living a stay-at-home life, raising young children? Or is it a 65-year-old man that really loves to be outside? And so we really need to understand who we're speaking to. Again, going back to that like speech analogy, this is like the difference in giving a speech to kindergartners or teachers or veterans or entrepreneurs. All of that conversation would look very different to all of those different people, because confidence looks different to different people. Same thing. If you're selling skincare looks different to, the clean girl versus a man in his 60s that might just need something simple because he has dry skin. Like, those are two very different audiences. And sure, everybody might be able to use your product, but you can't sell to everybody. We have to specify that and get that a little bit deeper. The next one is really looking at brand values. Again, taking the skincare example, a brand value can be health, it can be ingredients, it can be, non-toxic, it can be you really stand on sustainability, so you make sure that it's all sustainable. There's also other brand values that kind of go throughout your brand that don't have to be tangible like that. Like, your brand values might really be on like authenticity or inclusivity. That still sounds weird, but you know what I'm trying to say. Your brand values can be something that's a little less like product based. I guess they're all tangible, but what are the values that like you're kind of putting your stake in the ground on? Like, what do you stand for? Are you organic? Are you like, what is that really, that feeling there? Again, that differentiator is similar to a brand value, but your differentiator is going to be almost kind of like your elevator pitch, kind of like a slogan. What actually really separates you from everybody else? What is different about your product? Is it that, you just have to buy this starter kit and it's the only product that you need that is going to replace Botox in your life, or whatever that might be? We need to come up with kind of a phrase, a tagline, and if it isn't actually tangible, again, some products actually have a tangible differentiator, like you are creating a skincare line that has never been done before with products that have never been utilized before, or we have to identify that differentiator. You kind of have to create it. The last one is that brand identity. These are the four major ones. Brand identity is all about the aesthetic. So let's think of a skincare brand. I want you to envision a skincare brand in your head right now. And like, what are the adjectives of the brand that you're thinking about? Are you thinking like organic, where there's a lot of like eucalyptus leaves and it's green and it's like filmy photos and it's, kind of like supernatural, feels like it could almost be in Bali? Or is it a bold, groovy, almost 80s vibe in your face kind of brand? Or maybe it's like disco cowgirl, and that is their overall aesthetic. I want you to think about those things: the disco cowgirl, the organic brand, or the groovy kind of 80s, oranges and yellows. And like, what are the real differences between those? It's not going to waver. You can have all the same ideal customer, brand values, and differentiator between all three of those brand visuals. It's really just the actual tangible visual element that you are adding here. Yes, they have to be strategic according with your ideal customer. Your ideal customer has to like that, blah, blah, blah. But we can kind of think about this right now. Like, I want you to think about how those three different brands would actually tangibly look. What would their feed look like? What would their website look like? What would their photos look like? And how could you really adapt those things for those different visuals? Now, thinking about your brand. Who are you selling to? Deeper than women between the ages of 25 and 45. You need to know this person like the back of your hand. You need to know this person like they are your best friend. I want you to be able to write down what this person is doing from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night. Like, what does their full day look like? You should really know what they're thinking, knowing, doing, feeling at all hours throughout the day. You need to know this person literally like they are a best friend. Maybe it's a past you. Maybe it's current you. Maybe it is your friend group, or maybe it it is somebody that you are just trying to relate to and that you are trying to build. You need to know your ideal customer really well so you can use messaging. You can tailor your photos. You can tailor your branding. You can tailor the wants because you know the wants of that product market. The next one is your brand values. What do you want your business to be known for? There really isn't a right or wrong answer to brand values. It is something that you get to decide, but it also can be a major differentiator. Look at like Good American. They are a jean company and they're like one of the most size inclusive jean companies that there is out there. Their brand value is inclusivity, but it's also their differentiator. They have a lot of different values. They have a value in giving back. They have a value in being inclusive. They have a value in a lot of different pieces, but their brand values is actually what set them apart and allowed them to set the scene within their differentiator. That their differentiator in Good American really was, we are the most size inclusive business out there. And so they were a jean company, at least. Like we were able to put that out there and they were able to stand by it. And it's why people love them so much. So you need those brand values because it builds community. It builds people that really feel so connected to you. All of these things are building a community, creating like an actual audience on social media and selling to people so much easier because you can see as I'm speaking this through how much more specific your marketing gets to be than if I were to tell you, I want you to start a denim company, a jean company, or if I were to want you to start a denim company that is the most size inclusive brand out there with some organic vibes to it, then you can kind of start to identify, what are the topics that we're talking about? What are the visuals that it looks like? What are the content ideas? You can already talk about inclusivity and what all of that means and why you are more inclusive than other people and like maybe your story. There's so many things that you then can start developing, which turn into content ideas. So when we start looking at this, once you have these pillars, your messaging, content topics, your content ideas gets to be a lot easier, gets to be more fun and more flowy. Is this having a content strategy? No, but it sure does help. And you do need it to create content. Like I said, you really shouldn't even be creating content without having these pieces. This is what a business plan, a business proposal really has, is these pieces. It's the foundations of your brand. I think there's like 17 elements of a business proposal or a business plan. And these are 4 of them, but I think these are the most important that I really want you to know. And so what we really look at is if your content is feeling sticky, then we actually have to dig deeper and say, okay, why is this feeling sticky? Who are you talking to? Or like what? Because content should feel like some of the easiest thing to do. I could literally post content all day long. I could create 6 feed posts every single day because I know the foundations of my brand. I know who I'm speaking to. I know their problems. I know the benefit that I provide them. And I could really speak to my people all day long. I have a content strategy behind it. And so what we do is we first have to identify this. This is the pillars of the 4 steps of building consistent sales on social media. And how it works is we do these things first. These are all things that we do week 1 in our first kickoff call, literally in less than 1 hour in the first week of PTP. I do this with every single client personally in a one-on-one call. We make sure that these 4 things are really concrete. They're really going to be they're really going to be potent, and they actually allow for your business to be much more marketable. These are things we can do in under an hour. And then we can actually start talking about the presence. Then we can start talking about what your online presence looks like, your bio, your content, your highlights, your feed posts, like your stories, what all of those things look like. You really can't even create those effectively if you don't have these pieces. This is why strategy and why like having business foundations is so important, is because it's a great example of once you really have the strategy down, once you understand kind of like the necessary elements of business, that business actually gets so much easier because you just went from trying to just give a speech to giving a speech to kindergartners about confidence in a nurturing tone. And so now, thinking about that, think of how many different ways you could take that, how many different ways you could speak to them, how specific you could speak to them, and how really centered your speech could be for that specific audience. After you decide these pillars, you get to look at the presence. Your content gets to be a lot easier. Once these foundations are set, you attract more aligned people because you know who you're talking to, you know the problems that they're solving, and you know why your brand, they can literally see see why your brand is so wonderful, you can create content that is engaging and specific and almost has this like odd obsess factor that people find you and they're like, oh my gosh, how did I not know about this person before? Because you're literally speaking to them. You're speaking to their problems. This shapes all of your messaging in your content because you need to be speaking to certain people. You can use the slang of these people. You can use the memes that they would understand. You can use the jokes that they would understand, the references, the music, all of those things are things because you now know the foundations of your brand and who is watching you. You can also start building a real community. Community needs to be at the forefront of your brand. But when we look at this, again, pillars, presence, people, and profit. People is step number 3 because we need these foundations first. They all build on top of each other. We need these foundations first. Then we build content around it, really speaking to these ideas, really speaking to like having the 7 different types of content infused in there so we can speak to everybody, having real depth into our marketing. And then we can focus on engaging and really building those people that we really want to have in front of us, that would love our product, that would feel so connected to what we're saying because your differentiator was and your messaging was created for them. And so a lot of times I have people come to me and they say, Maddie, I can never come up with content to post. I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, tell me about your brand. And they're like, I sell candles. I'm like, okay, what kind of candles do you sell? We need to dig a little bit deeper than that. So a lot of times when you're actually struggling with content, and if you are saying right now, like, I want you to ask yourself, do I have these things? Do you know your ideal customer like a best friend? Do you know what your brand stands for? Do you know the vibes and the aesthetic and the visuals that you're looking for? Do you know what really tangibly sets you apart? And that can't just be like affordability or health or comfort. Like, it's not that tangible sometimes. We have to put in emotion. How does it feel to really utilize your product? And if you don't know those things, we have to work there before we can even really start talking about content. Again, it's a great example of how a lot of times the question that we're asking is not really the question that needs to get solved in order to see a result. A lot of times the question that we're asking is not really the question that needs to be solved in order to get the desired result. It's just like when somebody comes to me and says, Maddie, my website must be terrible because nobody's buying from it. And I said, well, a lot of times it's not actually your website. You really, like, your website can be pretty bare bones if you have a community and have really great marketing. Like, you a lot of times have to go all the way back to the start. A lot of times have to go, okay, well, who are you trying to talk to? Do you know what makes you so different? And then we can kind of build on there. What does your marketing look like? What does your content look like? And a lot of times I can actually see when people come to me and say, Maddie, like, I'm looking for help. I really want to like build my sales online. I can look at their Instagram and see if they have these pieces just based off of how specific their content is, how in-depth their content is, the topics that they're talking about, or lack thereof. If your content has a lot of just like, here's my product, go and buy it, or like, look at how cute this is, here's a new pattern, like, I'm obsessed with this pattern, I'm obsessed with that pattern. If that is how your content looks all of the time, a lot of times I realize you're probably lacking a little bit of this, which is okay. You now know, and we have to kind of come up with what this looks like. These are the 4 major foundational pillars of your brand that you need to know in order to really thrive on social media, because it helps you stand out. It helps you create that community. It helps you call people in. It helps you create content that is actually engaging. And this is just one major element. Because then once you have this, I had somebody ask, I talked about this topic on a live today, and I thought that it was really important and I wanted to bring it here. And I think it was really helpful to the people that were there as well. And this person was saying this, and then she said, okay, that's great. Like, I know I need to figure these things out. But she said, I'm really struggling with understanding, like, really how to repeat myself, but not repeat myself on social media. And what should my content look like? So after you have these pieces, and I teach my 7 types of content, you're able to notice, this is who my brand is. And then you can answer these questions. How can I educate around these ideas? How can I provide value? How can I build authority? How can I engage and relate to people? How can I create a personality around my brand? And how can we really utilize different types of content to basically say this one thing a million different times? And I give that framework throughout in order to really help people do it. It's one of the major things that I do is really teach content strategy, especially inside of PTP, because marketing really comes from a lot of messaging, and we need these pieces to have really solid messaging. So I challenge you today to really look at these 4 elements. Look at your ideal customer, look at your brand visuals, look at your brand identity and your values, look at your differentiator, and we have to come up with what that is. If your brain is kind of spinning and you're like, Maddie, I have no idea what that really means. How do you come up with these? How do I decide on them? How do you strategically pick them? Feel free to reach out. Like I said, this is just one step of the puzzle. We do this week 1 in PTP together in a one-on-one kickoff call. You and I sit down and we get these 4 things really concrete, because I don't even want to look at your website. I don't even want to start talking about content you need to create. I don't even want to start talking about a launch until I know that you have these pieces down, because everything else that you do after getting these really solid and very specific actually gets so much more strong, so much more power behind it, so much more potent, because you now have specified exactly who you're talking to and how to really talk to them. And so if you are looking for that support, you can DM me on Instagram at This Is Madison Page. You can DM me PTP. At the time that this episode is coming out, we are starting our next round on 1 week. And so we have 1 week from the day that this is coming out. If you're listening to this, reach out before the doors close. Would love to have you inside of there and get that level of support. It's not like I'm just giving you, it's not like a podcast where I'm like, here, go and do this. This is you and I working really closely together. This is you learning real frameworks. It's you learning the 7 types of content. It's us coming up with what these 4 things are and really co-creating alongside of each other. If that sounds really supportive and something that you're craving, kind of to start 2025, get some of these business foundations and so much more. This is literally 5% of running an online business. You do this once and it's solid and it's solidified, and you hopefully never have to do it again. And so we need to have these things. Of course, you can always tweak and adjust your visuals, whatever, but we need to have these things solid, and then we can build really great content, a really engaging community, and you can kind of go from there. I hope this was helpful. I love you. I'm rooting for you. I'm in your corner always. Make sure that you are subscribed, and I will chat with you in the next episode.